Hi there, it's Tracy Kiernan from stepbysteppainting.net, and this acrylic painting tutorial is going to show you how to paint a lighthouse. So this is a kind of a galaxy sky effect, ocean, a little bit of waves, and a little bit of a sunset along the horizon line, and of course that really pretty lighthouse. I will be demonstrating this to you on an 11 by 14 inch canvas. And I'm going to go ahead and go over the brushes that I used and the colors. I used a 3/4 flat and a 4 round brush. And I used these two special effects brushes, so a toothbrush, and this is actually a makeup blender brush. I have used this for previous tutorials. Basically, it helps smooth your strokes out so they're nice and smooth and blended, kind of the airbrush effect. That brush is optional, by the way. And so for the colors, I used Primary Yellow, Mars Black, Burnt Sienna. These are the Liquitex Basics paints, by the way, but you can use whatever paints you have available. Cerulean Blue. I used Turquoise, Titanium White, Phthalo Blue, and Unbleached Titanium. And I also used painter's tape. So we're going to go ahead and get started. This is an 11 by 14 inch canvas, and I'm going to mark the horizon line with painter's tape. So I am using a ruler to mark the 5-inch mark from the bottom of the canvas. So this is not centered, it's a little bit below center. So if you're using a different size canvas, you'll want to kind of adjust that. So 5 inches. And I'm going to take my painter's tape, place that below the little marks, and then make sure that's flat on the surface. If you don't have painter's tape, or if you don't want to use painter's tape, you can just draw a horizontal line with a straight edge or ruler. So we're going to start with the sky, and I used 5 colors in this sky. I have Mars Black, Phthalo Blue, Cerulean Blue, Unbleached Titanium, and Titanium White, all loaded onto my palette. And I'm going to use this 3/4 flat wash brush, but I'll also use that blender brush to smooth my strokes out to create that sort of airbrush effect. So let's start with the black. Our sky is darkest at the very, very top of the painting, and it gets much lighter towards the bottom. So we're going to take our 3/4 flat, load that in water, kind of tap it dry, and then load it in the Mars Black. So we're doing these kind of short, sort of angled strokes at the very, very top, made kind of an arc of black at the top. Then, without rinsing your brush, go ahead and load Phthalo Blue. So if there's too much, if there's like a lot of black on your brush, then I would recommend kind of wiping some of that black off. Otherwise, this would be solid black. But taking that Phthalo Blue and making sort of another arc area with the same kind of strokes, little angled strokes. And if you're not using the blender brush, you would just be doing the same thing that I'm doing. It would be, it would not show the airbrush effect, but it would still show this sort of blended effect, and it would still look like a galaxy in the sky. The little angled, kind of small, choppy strokes. And then I'm going to proceed with that lighter blue, that's the Cerulean Blue, and I'm going to take that down. At this point, my arc just kind of ended up being flat, and that's okay. So using that Cerulean Blue, and before that dries, I'm going to go ahead and take my blender brush. So again, this is an e.l.f. brand makeup brush, $4 at Target. Got it a long time ago, but you can find any kind of mop style rounded brush that has a very soft bristles. This is dry. There's no paint added to the brush. I'm just using it to smooth out the paint that's on my canvas, and I'm just kind of barely letting it. I'm not pressing down super hard with it, just using the tip of it to paint circular strokes, and that will blend the first set of strokes that you created with that flat brush. So then we're going to proceed down and do this again. But our goal is to make our sky lighter as we work our way down. So this time around, I'm doing Phthalo Blue, still some Cerulean Blue, and Titanium White. When you add that white and blend that white in there, that's going to allow your blues to be lighter. So you do another row, and then you take your blender brush, and you do a little circular blending. You don't need to rinse your brush with each blending unless you find that there's like a lot of black on it somehow. Then you can rinse it or you can wipe it off. But because we're not adding any paint to that blender brush, there wouldn't be a need to rinse and dry. Plus, that brush holds a lot of water, so it would be kind of hard to dry that once you add the water to that brush. So white, blue. Because we're creating a galaxy effect, it's okay if there's some darker areas in the areas where we want that to look lighter, and it's okay if we have lighter areas that end up seeping up into the darker areas. So you're just going to keep going one row at a time and then going in and blending it. When you get close to your horizon line, you want to make sure you add extra white in that area. So for that row, I did a lot of white. Just be really careful when you blend that white up. And right here, I actually on purpose dragged that white sort of up into the darker area. Gives it sort of like a Milky Way effect. Just doing a little circular blending up into the dark, but I don't want to lose a lot of that dark. If you bring too much light up in the dark and you want to fix it, you can always go back and add more black or add more darker blue. Later on, you're doing this in layers. So I rinsed off my 3/4 flat all the way, and we're going to introduce this beige color. So this is going to give the bottom of our sky that sort of like yellowish glow. Even though we're not using yellow, we're using beige because the beige blends much easier with the blue than yellow would. And so that time around, I did horizontal strokes with the beige, then grabbed a little bit of that cerulean blue and let that blend, and then took my blender brush and blended that up. So you might have to work that area a little bit more because the beige is kind of a drastic change of color. So we're going to go back, add a little bit more of that cerulean blue in there. Again, for this, I'm doing the horizontal strokes and then taking my blender brush and still doing the circular strokes to kind of smooth that out, give it that airbrush effect, but that little glow along the horizon line, I did that with horizontal strokes. And then blend it back up. You want to just be careful not to over blend your colors. You want a nice variety of colors. If you keep blending, it's just going to all kind of mesh together and be the same. Add a little bit more dark up here where it might have gotten too light. It's okay at this point if you want to experiment with adding a little paint to the blender brush. Just try not to add too much paint. And did little bits of black to that. I'm just kind of blending that up and blend this down just a little bit. Remember, we're going to remove that painter's tape next. Actually, before we remove the painter's tape, let's go ahead and do our star splatters. So I'm using a toothbrush for this. Also optional, you can use like your flat brush and you can flick the flat brush. I used my finger to put water on the toothbrush and the paint, so it gives it a nice consistency of water to white. You want your white to be just slightly watered down, but not dripping. And test this out on a separate surface before applying it to your canvas, because you don't want it too thick, you don't want it too thin, it might be drippy. But when you do get the right consistency, you get the different sizes of the white splatters, and it gives it that really pretty star galaxy effect, and it looks very pretty up in the darker areas. So when you're done with that, then you can remove your painter's tape, and we don't have to wait for this to dry. We can go on to this step. We're going to paint the ocean. So we're going to introduce turquoise to our palette, a really pretty turquoise color in the ocean. and we'll be using our 3/4 flat. So go ahead, rinse your 3/4 flat, and we'll set our toothbrush and our blender brush to the side. We are done with those brushes. And our 3/4, let's load that in. Let's do about equal parts white and turquoise. So this turquoise is actually kind of a dark color. So adding some light into it. We want a light sort of glow just under that horizon line. So this is equal parts turquoise and white. And using our 3/4 flat, we're doing horizontal strokes. And get as close as possible. I suppose you can reapply painter's tape, preferably a clean thing of painter's tape, but I didn't do that because my sky wasn't dry and I didn't want to smudge the sky. So I'm just going to be really careful, use the tip of the brush to get as close as possible to that edge. So I'm actually adding more white in there because I want that part to be really pretty light glowing color just under that horizon, and then it gets dark very fast. So as I'm going down in this ocean area, I'm loading just the turquoise to my brush, full width strokes horizontally. So in the sky we did those choppy angled strokes. We are not doing that in the water. We're doing horizontal strokes in the water, and we're not using our blender brush either in the water. These are just very simple left and right strokes that go across the canvas. My turquoise was drying very fast, so I loaded my brush in just a teeny bit of water and then kind of distributed that into the paint on palette. I'm going to go down a little bit more than halfway and then introduce Phthalo Blue. So if you look at the finished version, it's actually a darker blue at the bottom, just under the rocky area, which, by the way, we're not worrying about where our rocky area is. We're not worried about where the lighthouse is at this moment. We're just painting water. So here we're doing Phthalo Blue, and we're blending Phthalo Blue up into our turquoise. So the very bottom of our ocean, this dark, deep phthalo blue color that blends up into our turquoise color. So when you get to kind of the transition zone, you just want to work that area a little bit extra by painting over where dark blue and turquoise meet, but it does not have to blend perfectly. So I'm actually going to grab some more turquoise and then take my turquoise and go back over that transition zone. It's where the turquoise and the blue meet. I'm just going to let that go over blue and phthalo, and then it blends. But again, it does not have to be a perfect blend because in that area we're going to have this division of rocks covering kind of that transition zone anyway. So that's why I said it doesn't have to be a perfect transition. We do need to let all of this dry before proceeding to the next step. The next step involves drawing rocks and a lighthouse with a piece of chalk. I used a piece of chalk. You can use a pencil or a white chalk pencil if you want. These are very basic, simple shapes that we're going to create. I'm going to first mark 1.5 inches from the bottom of the canvas. And that is going to be where the bottom of my rock area is. So 1.5 inches of space of dark water below our rocks. And I'm not going to do a horizontal line. I'm going to do a sort of a wavy line that goes in a horizontal direction. So there's my first measurement. And my second measurement is how high this rock formation is. And that is about 1.5 inches high. So at 1.5 inches, I'm going to make a horizontal mark and a horizontal line that is about 4 inches wide. So that's our little flat land that our lighthouse is going to be sitting on. And then on each side of that line, I'm going to do kind of these wavy lines because those are going to be rocky. And then I'm going to draw all these sort of rocks inside of that shaped area. So I'm just going to sort of guess how these would look. So using that wavy line that we initially drew, but also adding some larger rocks towards the bottom, some smaller ones at the top. There's some overlapping happening, and we can have some little rocks kind of peeking up above the flat area. So now we have a long area with our rocks. Next, I'm going to draw the lighthouse. I'm going to find the center of the painting and make a 7-inch mark from that horizontal line that we made up. And then I'm going to define how wide I really wanted this horizontal line to be at the bottom. So that is about 3.5 inches wide. So drawing another horizontal line at 3.5 inches. And then I'm going to sketch 2 diagonal lines. These are getting narrow as they go up, but they don't reach a point. And our width at the top is 2 inches. So make sure those 2 lines, diagonal lines that we created, about 2 inches apart, and then draw a curve at the very top. So there's our tower of our lighthouse. And then since we sketched those lines, we can go back with a ruler and make them straight. So I'm just using the ruler to go back over my lines. Next, I'm going to draw the balcony. I don't have exact measurements for this, but maybe like a 1/4 inch, half, 1/8 inch little diagonal lines, and then little curve, and then these go vertical, and then another curved line. And then we can do the part where our little light is going to be. So 3 vertical lines. And then the little dome at the top, diagonals, so that's a little triangle at the top. The triangle is about 1.5 inches from the bottom to the point, and then the little ball vent at the top, little oval, and that is the basic drawing of our lighthouse. We can do a little railing right here, so I did another little curved line inside of there, and little vertical lines. So we're done with the lighthouse drawing, and I went ahead and grabbed some fresh water. My water was very dark because I used a lot of dark colors in the background. I am using a 3/4 flat wash brush in titanium white, and I am just going to paint this tower solid coat of white. There will be a little bit of shading in this, but let's just worry about covering all of this long tower shape with white. So when we get to like this area right here and the edging, we can use the tip of the brush to outline the inner part of that shape. So you can hold your brush so where you're using just the tip of it, just on the inner part, outlining, and then filling it in solid using the full width of the brush, going in vertical strokes. You might run into some issues with your horizon line, and you can still see a bit of that horizon line through that white. So you might need to add extra coats of paint in that area or apply it much thicker so that it covers that. So titanium white is a very opaque color, but because it's a very sharp line, it might take a couple coats to actually cover that. So this is our first layer. When this dries, we can add a little bit of white over it again. So we're going to do some shading next, and actually you could wait for this to dry, but it's actually best to let that white paint still be wet to help with the blending of the shadowing. So we're going to load our palette with our Phthalo Blue. And without rinsing the brush, there's still white on the tip of my 3/4 flat brush. Add a little bit of blue to the tip of the brush, and just on the edge, we're going to do little tiny bits of blue, like we're outlining that inner edge again with the blue. Do that on both sides. Again, you don't want a lot of blue on your brush. Your lighthouse will turn blue if you add too much blue. Little bit. And then I'm just going to do, using the tip of the brush, very, very gently introducing that, but I'm going to load white on my brush. That white's going to help blend it. We need that blue to get very light very fast. So the edge of the lighthouse is outlined darker blue. That's the darker shadowy part. And then we're blending it in to the center of that tower. Using the full width of the brush to blend. Load your brush in the white so your blue quickly turns light. The center of your lighthouse needs to be bright and white, so just very gently blending that. Vertical strokes. It's actually going a little bit diagonal on the sides, but in the center it's going very vertical. And just long vertical strokes, paint's blending on the canvas. So we have a little bit of shading going on in our tower. At this point, the horizon line is not really showing through, but we can always add more coats of white paint in that area if we need to. Even later on in this painting, after this dries, we can always go back and add some white for coverage. So there's our tower. And next we'll be painting the balcony area with Mars Black. So if you need to freshen up black on your palette, load some more black. And we'll be using the 4-round brush for this. Load that into the water and pinch your bristles so that your bristles are all gathered together, and then load your black on the tip of those bristles. And start by painting those 2 little diagonal lines that we initially drew and outlining that curve at the very top of that tower. And then we need a solid shape. So this is kind of like an arc shape. And then right here we have 2 vertical lines. And then we have a curved line, basically just painting over what I drew with the chalk, but with the black paint. This one is a little bit thick at top. Reload with more black paint, loading that just on the tip of the brush. And then we have our little railing, so that one's a thin line. And then we have vertical lines that are somewhat equally spaced apart. And before this dries, I'm going to do a little bit of highlighting in it. I'm going to load my palette with a little bit of titanium white, kind of mix that together so it's more of a gray. And on the right side of this balcony area, I'm going to do right and left side. I'm going to take the white and kind of drag it into the paint. So it's kind of lighter on those sides, but then it quickly gets dark in the center. A little bit white on the vertical line and the top kind of curved line. So it kind of creates that highlight in the black. Did a little bit on the vertical pieces as well. So our white is not blending all the way with the black, it's just kind of giving it some color variation. And then 3 vertical lines under that dome. That's where our light will be. And then this triangle, we can paint that solid black. Again, outlining the shape helps. And then filling it in solid. I did these in kind of vertical and diagonal strokes. And then our little ball vent at the top, the little oval. There's still chalk showing through as you're painting. A lot of times the chalk will erase, but sometimes if there's chalk on the outer parts of what you paint, it can be erased at a later step. And then I took that white and again did the little highlighting thing a little bit on the very bottom, in the bottom of that little oval, without blending it all the way. And then next we can go ahead and paint the door. So I'm just going to do the door on the left side. If you want it to be centered, you can make yours centered. I'm going to do two little vertical lines, make a little rectangle, and then grab a little bit of white to do a triangle, and that white will blend with black to make it kind of gray. So there's the top of the door. We're going to do this kind of loosely and abstractly. And then we have 3 windows. So that little window has a little curve at the top, although it is a very small detail. So if you feel more comfortable doing this with a black paint pen, you can definitely do this with a paint pen instead of the round brush. And each window gets slightly smaller as we work our way to the top. Creates some perspective. This one's a little bit smaller. Each of the windows have a little curve at the top. So keep that very simple. I'm going to go ahead and this is a baby wipe, but you can use like a soft paper towel and put a little bit of water on it. I'm going to erase the chalk lines. So this needs to be done if where you're erasing is dry. If wherever you're erasing is not dry yet, you'll need to dry that or wait till a later step. I'm just going to clean this up a bit. Be very careful around the top where that black is still a little bit wet up there. But it's always nice to kind of clean your chalk lines up. And it just gently wipes off with that. It also works with a wet paintbrush, but I find that if you use a wet paintbrush, you end up with residue left after that dries. So the baby wipe actually lifts off the residue of the chalk, and so it works better. And then next we're going to go ahead and paint all of these lovely rocks in, and I'm going to do that with Mars Black and Burnt Sienna and the number 4 round brush. So let's go ahead and use the clean and wet number 4 round brush. Let's load it in just the black at first. So we're going to paint the first layer of these rocks black. And I'm going to paint them individually, even though these are all going to be black. So they're all going to kind of run together. But I still want to outline each kind of individual rock and then paint it in solid black. So I'm just going to each of these rocks and outlining the shape. So this part right here is flat. I can paint that so it's kind of a flat land area. But then we have some rocks sort of overlapping that. So outline the shape of the rock and then fill it in solid. And yes, it's all going to kind of mesh together, but that's okay. And then there's a little bit of, so the bottom part of the rocks is not necessarily flat where it meets the water. So there's a little bit of curved shape at the bottom. You can add a small rock over here, outline, and then fill in. And you'll want to not let this dry because we're going to use the black layer to help blend our next layer. There's still some chalk lines showing through, and that's okay. So without rinsing your brush, let's grab our burnt sienna And this is going to show up relatively dark at first because we still have black on our brush. That black is still wet. And we're just going to go back and on each of the individual rocks, on the left side of all those rocks, I'm painting kind of this curved sort of outline and then blending it in with the rest of the rock. So the right side of the rock ends up being black, but the left side shows the brown, and it just kind of blends in. And we're being sort of abstract about this. So right here, little curve on the left side, kind of blends in with the rest. Then we can introduce white into this. So grab a little bit of white on your palette, kind of mix it on the palette. And then so this one, you want to be very gradual about this. So on the right side of the rock, I'm going to add just a little bit of that light color and just kind of blend it in. We don't want it to be too bright. So if it's showing up too bright, you might want to add a little bit of black or a little bit of brown to that, but I'm letting this blend on the canvas. So very, very lightly add that to the right side of the rocks or on the top part of the rocks and just kind of blend that down into sort of angled strokes, kind of curved and angled strokes. So we're not trying to lose our first layer, that dark layer that we made initially. We're just highlighting these rocks, little curved dabbing strokes that kind of blend with our brown and black layer. So I did that mostly on the top and mostly on the right side of all our rocks. And then we can go back in with more brown if needed. So I'm going to add a little bit of brown kind of in this area, some of the other areas. It's important not to try to overblend and overwork it. So there's our rocky area. Can add a few more little bits of lighter color up here or wherever you feel it's needed, but we don't want to overblend it. So right now it just looks like the rock, and we can even use our finger to kind of blend it if we want, but I'm not going to smudge any of this because I like how the strokes look. It does look like the rocks are just kind of floating in the water, and we will be adding reflection next, and it's going to look like that it's actually more a part of that water area with that reflection. So when we're done with our rocks, let's go ahead, rinse, and we need some fresh titanium white on our palette. We're going to do two reflections. We're going to do the reflection of the white tower in the water, and then we're going to do a reflection of the rocks. But we're going to do our white tower reflection first. So let's grab the 3/4 flat. And you'll need a towel for this because we want this to be a very thin layer. We want to, in fact, see a lot of that water through our layer of white. So load it in the white, wipe it off so there's not a lot of paint on your brush, and use the full width of the brush to drag it down. You can kind of make the opposite shape so you can have it kind of angle a bit. But you're dragging that down, and it's just going to look like white streaks in the water, and that is the reflection of the tower. Then we're going to grab our number 4 round brush and the black, twisting that black so it's on the tip of the brush. We're going to create thin black reflection lines in the water under the rocky area. So this is the reflection of the rock in the water. And we are going to allow this to also overlap parts of that white reflection we just made. So if you're doing this and it's blending and mushing into your white area, let the white dry and then go back over it and create those black lines. That's going to create the illusion that there is water and reflection. It's a very simple technique. So these lines, very thin. You can kind of vary the width of them, like as you kind of work your way down, you can make the width be a little bit wider, relatively close together, but we don't want to cover up too much of our pretty blue layer. And then we're going to do white reflection lines in the turquoise water area, so way in the distance. So let's go ahead and get our 3/4 kind of rinsed off, set that out. And let's do this with the 4-round brush. You could do this with the 3/4 brush, but we want to create some very, very small, thin lines, and that'll be hard to do with the flat brush. So we're going to do the round brush. So pinch the bristles, grab the white on the tip. So same thing what we just did with the black, but we're going to do this with the white. Because these ones are far away, those lines need to be very small and not as wide. But as you work your way down, they start getting wider, longer. So that creates some distance in your reflection lines. So the further you get, the denser and smaller they are, the closer it is to the bottom. They get more stretched and further apart. We can also create, so some of those I actually on purpose pressed my brush down harder to make them look thicker, give it some like little waves almost. And then we can also do some white reflection lines down here too. So just doing a few. Some of those lines ended up actually being like a snake line, like a little squiggly line. And then, so don't do this if this is not dry right here, but this is dry enough for me to do this right here. I'm doing thicker lines, almost like little soft waves that are kind of brushing up against the rocks. Behind the rocks, we're going to actually create some splash strokes, but right now we're just doing some soft waves. So those ones, it's just kind of like a thick, you're pressing harder on your brush to create some thicker lines, almost like you're stippling, like a little soft sort of wave line that's kind of overlapping the bottom part of your rocks. Next, I'm going to do some more detail work in the sky and actually paint a few more hand-painted stars. So I like to do this in nighttime paintings. I'll make a dot and then I'll use my finger to kind of smear the dot. So that creates a glow around the star. And then you go back and do another dot inside of that after you smear it. So that creates the bright part of the sky. So that'll create a lot of pretty details in this sort of exaggerated nighttime galaxy sky. If you want, you could do constellation. You can do a shooting star. There's quite a few little nighttime details you can do. So I'm just going around and doing a little dot, smear the dot, do a little dot inside of that. That creates some more detailed stars. Not all of them have to have that smeared glow. Some of them, they're just dots. You can even use yellow in some of the stars if you want to create some yellow stars. We will be introducing yellow to our palette in a later step when we paint the light inside the lighthouse. And then let's see. I decided to go here and add just a little bit extra highlight on the left side of that dome, a little bit on the bottom, a little bit on the railing. What we want to do next is I'm going to demonstrate how to do the light in the lighthouse next. But you want to make sure everything on that is dry. So dry that and then come back to this step. So mine is dry. And we want to load primary yellow onto your palette, although you can use any yellow that you have available. Take your number 4 round brush and load that in the yellow. And right here, we're going to paint a little circle. Then I'm going to take my finger. So this is similar to what I was just doing with the stars, only this is going to be a larger version of that. And you just smear that. So that's going to create a glow. And we're going to do this again because we want this glow to be even more exaggerated. So little dot. Take your finger, smear it outwards. That creates your yellow glow. And then wipe that off a little bit and grab your white. Do a little white in the middle. Take your finger, smear outwards, and that makes your glow a lot brighter. Do another layer of that. Smear that out. So now we have a bright glow. For the lights, the light beams, we want to be very careful at first. So already I am wiping my brush off. So we want this to be dry brush. It should not be super opaque. So I'm using my palette as a way to wipe my brush off. So when you're painting these beams, you want to make sure that not a lot of paint is on your brush. Just barely letting that skid the canvas, and it should be very see-through and dry. You should have to like work your brush multiple times because there's barely any paint on that brush. So that's yellow and white that I'm loading my brush with. That white really helps to make that yellow bright. So right here again, you just want to very gradually paint your beam. It should be thin and translucent. And if you need to wipe your brush off, you can. So I did a beam on both sides, one going to the left, one going to the right, and it's creating that glow. Add a little bit more right here with the white, but be careful not to let it be too opaque. And then in the center of that yellow glow, I'm going to take just the white and do like a little tiny white circle, and that's going to make that look extra bright. Then this is optional, but I wanted to do kind of an exaggeration of this glow by taking that white, just kind of making this circular sort of ring going around it. Again, very dry brush-like, not opaque at all. You want to make sure you are wiping that brush off and loading only tiny amounts of paint on the brush. That's how you create that effect. If needed, you can go back over some of the railing and the lines. So like right here, because that light is behind those lines. So two vertical lines. This one right here, it's too wet to kind of mess with that, but I'm just going to leave that line kind of only showing at the top and the bottom. That light is super bright. So that makes it look more like that light is inside. The next two things I'm going to do are paint another layer of white, specifically the part where we still see kind of that horizon line. So I'm just going to add a little bit more white in that area, knowing that there's still some shading there I don't want to mess up, and I don't want to mess with the window either, but just adding that extra bright white right there helped to cover that a little bit more. And then we're going to dry brush the splashes. So this is also dry brush technique. So you want to, and then this is 3/4 flat brush this time, but you want to only load a little bit of paint on the brush. You want to wipe it off. You can wipe it off with a towel. And then with these splashes are behind the rock. So I'm just using the full width of the brush And I'm just barely letting that skid the canvas so it kind of starts out bright, and then you quickly release the pressure. So you're dragging it at different angles, and that's creating that splash. So you want to make it a little bit brighter and opaque at the bottom. So you press a little bit hard at first, but then you quickly let go. And then you can kind of vary the heights of these. Some are longer, some are shorter. Another touch up we can do is go back and again, make sure this is dry, erase any chalk lines that are still visible if you haven't already erased all your chalk lines. And then I did few more little waves down here using the flat brush for this. So just tapping the brush, a few more kind of gentle seafoam waves kind of hitting the rocks. And a few more splashes as well. And then, so up here at the top of the dome tower, if it's not enough contrast up here, you can lightly, very lightly add a white kind of outline more on the side of that. That helps that get that to stand out a little bit better. But that is it. This is the conclusion of how to paint Lighthouse at night. Hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks for watching, and thanks for painting with me.